Afternoon. My name is Cornelius Harrison. Today's my talk is Standing on the Shoulder of Giants, Image Recognition with Python. So why standing on the shoulder of giants? I think there's been a renewed interest with image recognition. It's not new. There's been a lot of great people who did a lot of great work over the years to make this possible. But there's also been like a renewed interest with like the release of like new packages like TensorFlow, core models. So what we're going to start to see now, and what I'm going to go over today, is one step even above TensorFlow. So there's a lot of APIs, a lot of hosted services that will give you image recognition out of the box. So what exactly is image recognition? I think image recognition answers the question, like, what is in an image? It also labels interesting parts of an image, and it also helps with analyzing and categorizing images. So for humans, this is really easy for us. So if I was to look at this picture, go for it. If I was to look at this picture, like, how would I go about describing this image? One of the first things that stands out to me is the Jeep. After that, you might say the mountains, the blue sky. You might go back to the Jeep and say there's a red Jeep, also a dirt road. So like this comes second nature to us. Like we didn't really have to think about it. It's something that we do every day. But it's not quite as easy for computers. Well, until now. So like what type of information will a computer give us about this image? So one of the first things that you'll start to realize when you start using services is that they all will have some type of labeling system, either called tags, attributes, or whatever. So if I was going to give this image to a service, I would expect something like this to come back. So one of the first things that come back is automobile. Like sure, it's probably not the first way I would describe this, but it's of course an automobile. What you see next to the automobile is like a percentage. So every service will give you some type of percentage on like how sure they are about like this tag that they're giving you. So car, in the loose sense, it's a car. You can drive it, has 4 wheels, it's a car. Jeep is one of the first things I said. Off-roading is an interesting one. It is definitely off-roading. Then you have mountainous landform. So like mountainous landform is not exactly how I would describe this. Like I would just say mountains. But this is one of the great things about working with machine learning and image recognition. Like you don't know what you're going to get. As engineers, we're often like trained to predict every possible outcome of our applications. But with this, there's a little bit of uncertainty. And that uncertainty is fine, and it can also be fun. So what's next? Another important thing that you can get from image recognition is faces. So this is LeBron James. We all know that. But like, what more can we get from any type of surface? So a lot of things that can do facial recognition or emotions will give you something about gender. Is he happy? Is he sad? His age, either an age range or an exact age. If he's smiling, does he have hair? Is he wearing glasses? Is his eyes open? And this small bit of JSON that you see here is facial landmarks. So that's something that a computer gives that I probably couldn't tell you. I couldn't tell you the position of LeBron's left eye. But they will give you an X and Y coordinates. So you could do things like this. And when you see things like this, then you can start to think about the implications of things like Snapchat filters or anything like that. Next. Text. So this is an album cover. And I'll be honest with you, text is probably one of the least reliable things that I see offered in services, especially if you have any over-stylized text. So I ran this through 2 separate services, and I got this. So the first one is Jag Volume 2. So it's obviously had some issues picking up Jay-Z's name, and also some combination of what was supposed to be Hard Knock Life. But also had little issues with parental advisory explicit content in one, but you see in another one, not so well. So like if your application really depends on like having a textual analysis, you might want to look about or think about training your own models. So some other options here, description. There's some services that give you a nice human readable description. So as we see here, a brown and black Boston Terrier, landmarks. So this is, of course, the Statue of Liberty, celebrity recognition. There's also pre-made models of celebrities, and you can just pass it in and they tell you who's who. Logo recognition as well, and also for explicit content. So you can filter out everything that's probably not safe for work. So let's look at the landscape. There's a ton of different services out here. Like you pick your favorite tech giant, and more than likely they have some type of package, service, or API that you can use. Some of these are just strictly APIs, some of these are models that you download, or some of these are just packages that you can use to train your own models. Now, I'm not going to go over all of these. Specifically, I just want to talk about the APIs that you can use or the hosted services. So I'm going to focus on these 5. So let's dig into this. First one is Amazon. Amazon Rekognition, especially Amazon Rekognition for K. So Amazon Rekognition is, if you're familiar with the AWS ecosystem, it's just another Bodo call. So if you already have Bodo, or if you're already using Bodo, Amazon Rekognition might be a great start for you. They have a nice feature set. They have obvious labeling, explicit content, facial recognition, celebrity recognition, so forth. But they don't have a REST API. So if you're just doing like curl requests or you're doing something just for on the front end, Amazon Rekognition might not be the best bet for you. Microsoft Cognitive Services. So with all the work that Microsoft did with the Connect, they're now making some of that available in their Cognitive Services package. So they also have a Python SDK as well as a REST API. One of the shining points of Microsoft Cognitive Services is their facial and emotion detection. Their facial and motion detection is very scary. It's really good. So they can probably pick out your age into like 1 of 2 years. I was blown away when I first used this. One of the downsides about it is that their free service is only a 30-day trial, so after that 30-day trial, you probably have to create a new account. But they also have a full list of other features that are pretty great. Google Vision, another REST API with their own Python SDK. Google probably has the largest feature set of any of the services that are available. One of the great things about Google as well, because they are still a search engine at heart, passing any of their images will give you some type of search results back. So if we go back to the LeBron James image, you might get a link to his Wikipedia or a link to an ESPN sports article. IBM Watson. So we might know Watson from them beating everyone in Jeopardy. So they're also making that service available to you as an API. So again, Python SDK, REST API for implementation. The feature set's not as robust, but the one good thing about IBM Watson is that you can train your own models through the API. So just by passing in a list of a few images, I think you can start with a minimum of 20, and you have your fully flushed out custom model. CloudSight. CloudSight is a smaller private company, so if you don't want to use some of the big giants, there's also CloudSight. A smaller feature set, but what CloudSight does really well is give you a human-readable description of your image. So going back to what I had, the Boston Terrier, where it was a black and brown Boston Terrier, that's a short and human-readable description that CloudSight gives you. It's also very expensive, and I can go over price a little bit later. Clarifai is been doing this for a while now. One of the big things about Clarifai, they have a lot of pre-made models. So they have things about travel, wedding, food, that's all ready to use. So if you don't really want to use one of the big giants and you still want a full feature set, I think Clarifai is a great choice for everyone. So this is just like a quick overview of everything that I just went over. So one of the new things that I have on here is price. So pricing is probably the most difficult thing to kind of predict when you're using any of these type of services, but it can still be relatively cheap. So this is the price per 10,000 calls per month. So as you see, everything kind of hovers around the $10 to $20 mark, except for a cloud site where you're doing close to $300. Again, you can see that Google probably has almost everything checked off except for custom models, but Google is opening up a custom model training through the API very soon. All right, so actually, let's look at some code. Sure.
Why would they charge 300 if they hardly have anything with the engine?
Yeah, it's kind of weird. So if I take a step back, and they do descriptions very well. Probably better than like anyone else, and it's very like human and reasonable, it's like same way you describe it. There's rumors on the internet that they're somewhat human assistant, so there could be some type of human overhead charge to what they do. But things that you get back are really good, though. I will give them that. All right. Hopefully everyone can read this. So, unfortunately, this is so easy that the code's not even that interesting. So this is an example of making a call with the AWS recognition service. So I'm importing Bodo, which is the Python SDK. I'm using Python decouple just to handle my environment variables. That's one thing that each one of these services, they give you some type of API key that you need to use. So you see here, I'm just making an instance of the Bodo, going through, opening up an instance of the image, and then passing in with the detect label, which is a function that's similar to Bodo, and just printing it out the JSON response. This is an example for Google. This is a REST API, so I'm just using request here. We have the link to the API here. Again, just opening up the image, passing in the key here, creating the JSON response, JSON object, and then posting that. Very similar with Microsoft. Again, less than 20 lines of code that you can have image recognition in your application. So I'm gonna run a few of these so you can see what you might get back. So I have a picture of Beyonce here. There we go. We're going to run that. So as you see, this is just a JSON object that we get back, and this is doing the celebrity recognition. So they recognize that it was Beyonce. They also give some information about like the face. So the bounding box around her face came back as well, and just also information about just the post request. So that came back in just like a few seconds. We can do one more. So this is just a label detection. So this was a picture of John Wall here. And we got back that he's an athlete, sports, boxing. Yeah, I would hope so. John Wall is a great athlete, yes. Yeah, you can. So going back to like one of my slides there, you can do like logo recognition. So it's not available in all the services. Google's really good at it. Also, Clarify has it as well. So it all depends on like the service that you use, but you can look for Coca-Cola, Doritos, so forth. So one last thing, there's a service or a tool on GitHub called Cloudy Vision, where you can bring it down and you can call each one of the services individually and compare all of those. So what I'm gonna do is just run those against some of the images that we used earlier. So this is cache, so most of this stuff, hopefully we won't be making API calls. So right now it's just passing in a picture of LeBron James that I had, spitting out the results, and then this gives you an HTML output. So this gives you the tags for each one of the service that you get back. So this is the Jeep that we looked at earlier. Again, the first one is Amazon Rekognition with Microsoft, IBM, Google, CloudSight, and Clarify. So CloudSight that we looked at before just gives you a very short description, but it's pretty accurate. A red and black sports utility vehicle. There's a few weird ones in here, like Hurry and this is LeBron James. IBM is pretty good. Microsoft, man, person, player. I would like to be a little bit more specific than that. But what's interesting here is also the response time. So Microsoft's definitely the highest, with CloudSight not too far behind. IBM, actually, Amazon Rekognition seems to be the fastest. So response time is definitely something else that you want to keep track of in your application. All right, so some of the pros and cons of using services compared to using something like TensorFlow and starting your own models and training your own models. One of the first ones is just the ease of setup. You can get something up and running with just a few lines of code. Also, the low startup costs. Most of these cost cents of a dollar per call. Sometimes it's priced per thousand, so like it's either $1 or $2 per thousand. Rapid prototyping, if you need to get something up and running very fast in a hurry, this is a great way to start. And also plug and play. You can switch services very easy because it's just a REST API call. Some of the cons is the variable pricing. Well, once you start doing a high volume, which I'm going to go into later, like predicting the price that you need or you have a fixed price for a project is very hard. Do you have a question? Oh, go for it. Okay. Image accuracy. If you have application that you need like very specific image accuracy, I think for the most part you'll get like 80% with most of the services, but if you need something higher than that, then you probably want to train your own models. Or you have very specific need. Like if we all just wanted to make an application that just picked up the Pi Caribbean shirts, this is a time where you might have to train your own models, even though, like I said, services like IBM Watson and even Microsoft let you train your own models, but you won't have to keep that data either locally or if you're doing like an application, that's something that you might want to keep in mind. Also a high volume. So you are making REST API calls. So there is a disadvantage of making that many calls across the network. So that's something to also keep in mind. So why would you even want to do any of this? First, if you want to add searchable images to your application, this is a great way to get started. Image moderation, if you're taking in user content, you want to make sure they're not uploading anything that would not be acceptable. This is great. Adding extra feedback to your application. Also, if you're adding user content, let's say you're building an application that just is about cars. User uploads an image about a car, you can actually give them immediate feedback right then and there. It adds that extra polish to your application to make it really feel great. Also, a new way to interact with your app. So say you wanted to get feedback from your users, then you could take you can suggest for them to take a picture. Are they smiling? Are they sad? Sentiment analysis, like that's a really new thing that you don't see too often in applications. And also, there's just a cool novelty factor. So, like, if you just want to build something that's just weird and crazy, it's a good reason why. This is all my resources. So this is a link to each one of the services, also the Cloud Vision API. And that's all that I have. This is where you can find me on Instagram or Twitter, my link to the GitHub where I'll post some also code examples, and my email. So thank you.